welcome to the Humanicare webinar series. First of all, I just wanted to thank Humanicare for their sponsoring of this webinar series and for putting in all the effort that it takes to put something like this on. So thank you to Humanicare. So, without any further ado, let's get started here. My name is Brian Haley. I'm a registered clinical counselor on the Sunshine Coast in BC, and I'll be your presenter for today. Today's topic is compassion, and I've called this the Royal Road to Health and Happiness. Hopefully that will become more clear why I called it that as we go along today. So compassion, learning outcomes for today. What can you expect to take away with you from today's presentation? First of all, we're going to look at what is compassion, what's the definition of it, and what's it all about. Next, we're going to look at what is called self-compassion. What's the difference between self-compassion and compassion? And of course, we want to look at the benefits of being compassionate. Why should I bother even looking at this kind of a topic? What are the benefits to me and to others? And of course, what follows on logically from that is how do I become more compassionate? So let's look firstly at a quote from the Dalai-lama. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. I think that's one of the hallmarks of the Dalai-lama is compassion, so appropriate to have a quote from him, I think. So here's a quote from Barbara Fredrickson, who wrote a book called Positivity, of course looking at the effect of positive emotions on our entire physiology and so on. And she says love, or compassion, is our supreme emotion that makes us most fully alive and feel most fully human. It is perhaps the most essential emotional experience for thriving in health. I just wanted to put a little bit of emphasis on that for thriving in health. So this is kind of a broad statement that someone could make, and we could easily challenge that statement. However, Barbara Fredrickson has done probably at least 2 decades of research on the effect of positive emotions and negative emotions on the human physiology, on our minds, our emotions, and so on and so forth. So when she speaks a statement like this, it's coming from the mountains of research that she's done in the past. And also when we look at this, we usually think of love and compassion as being kind of the territory of religions and spiritual traditions. And certainly, you know, that is a big part of what they do, or one would hope that's a big part of what they do. However, love and compassion really are not the sole province of any particular group or system. In fact, love and compassion are an integral part of being human, the human spirit, we could say. Well, let's look at a little bit of a definition of compassion. So it comes from the Latin roots of com, which means with, and pati, which means suffer or to suffer with. We've all experienced sorrow and pain and suffering in this life, just a matter of degree, really. But I think it's safe to say that most of us have experienced this. So, but even looking at the different degrees and the content for each of us, we can still say that we have experienced this for sure, suffering and pain and so on in this life. In this kind of a personal history, really when we look at it, that pain and the suffering, it can keep our love hidden, really. It can hold it down. At times, we may even feel as though we can't love, that we're not capable of being loving or compassionate towards others or towards ourselves. We might feel that we just don't have it in us. If we look at compassion in a little bit broader way, compassion is the state of wishing that the object of our compassion be free of suffering. Yourself first, and then in a more advanced way, the aspiration will embrace others. Again, this is from the Dalai Lama, but certainly a true statement, and we will back this up as we go through the presentation today. So compassion offers care and well-wishing to another human being, really, without any expectation or demand, we could say. we don't feel any separation between the other's well-being and our own when we're being compassionate, that is. And as the Dalai-Lama so clearly points out here, self-compassion is the foundation of compassion for others. That's a very important piece of this, and we'll get into that in a complete section of its own in this presentation today. So again, this is from Christopher Germer, who's written a wonderful book called The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion. Highly recommend this book for anybody that wishes to do a little bit more research on their own into this topic. And also some wonderful meditations and practices that he has in his book. He's a PhD psychologist who as well has done a lot of research into this area. But Christopher tells us that being compassionate means that we recognize when someone is in pain. We abandon our fear of or resistance to it, and a natural feeling of love and kindness flows toward the suffering individual. So in the end, when we look back at our life, for instance, the question will be simple, I think. It'll be something like, did I live fully? Did I love well? Most of us aren't going to wonder, you know, should I have worked another 20 hours per week or taken on 10 more projects than I did or whatever. I think most of us are going to look at these kinds of questions. Did I live fully? Did I love well? And in light of that, I just wanted to read just a brief story here from another great little book here by Jack Kornfield. And I'll say more about this book as we go along too here. But this is a great little story that sort of illustrates what I'm talking about here. A stranger walked toward the gates of a new city. By the side of the road sat an old wise woman who hailed the traveler. "Welcome," she said. "What kind of people are they who live here?" the traveler asked. "How did you find them in the home city you left?" asked the wise woman. "Oh, they were gossips, mean-spirited, and often selfish, difficult to get along with." "Oh, well, you'll find the people in this city to be likewise." Later, a second stranger passed by and was welcomed by the old woman. "What kind of people are they who live here?" the second traveler asked. "How did you find them in your home city?" "Oh, they were fine people, industrious, open-minded, and easy to get along with." "Oh, well, you'll find the people of this city to be likewise." So compassion really it's not an intellectual pursuit. It's about being heart-centered. It's an opportunity for us to make a shift to the heart, really. I mean, it can start with an intellectual understanding, but really where we need to get to is that shift to the heart. And also, it's not really about the grand gesture or the heroic project, although those things can be useful and so on. But both large and small matters are worthy of love. And I'm going to look at one other short quote here for you. And this is from a teacher from back in the 60s, I believe it was. His name was Mayor Baba. Anyway, whether we've heard of him or not, this is a great little quote here. So, "The scope of selfless service is not limited to great gestures, heroic acts, and huge donations to public institutions. They also serve who express their love in little things. A word that gives courage to a broken heart, or a smile that brings hope in the midst of gloom, has as much claim to be regarded as service as difficult sacrifices and heroic self-denials. A glance that wipes out bitterness from the heart is also service, although there may be no thought of service in it. When taken by themselves, all these things seem to be small, but life is made up of such small things. If these small things were ignored, life would be not only unbeautiful, but unbearable." And I like this quote here. This is from Immanuel Kant, a philosopher from the, I think, early 1800s. So, "We can judge the heart of a man by his treatment of animals." Being an animal lover myself, and I'm sure many of you out there are as well, I'm sure you can relate to this. We talk about the small things or the small matters. So if one is to do good, it must be done in the minute particulars, as we've just said. General good is the plea of the hypocrite, the flatterer, and the scoundrel, says William Blake, famous English poet. And with that, I'd like to read you another short quote here. And this one is from Mother Teresa. And of course, what presentation on compassion without a quote or two from Mother Teresa would be complete, really? So this is from Mother Teresa. I never look at the masses as my responsibility. I look at the individual. I can only love one person at a time. I can only feed one person at a time. Just one, just one. So you begin. I begin. I picked up one person. Maybe if I didn't pick up that one person, I wouldn't have picked up 42,000. The whole work is only a drop in the ocean. But if I didn't put that drop in, the ocean would be one drop less. Same thing for you. Same thing in your family. Same thing in the community where you live. Just begin. One, one, one. And that's from Mother Teresa. So basically compassionate, we can say compassion also is not weak. To genuinely care for someone without demands or expectations calls for courage. It's really the courage to go beyond hate and fear, to truly let go and to let be. Now there are some obstacles, as we might expect, to compassion. And again, I'm going to look now to Jack Kornfield in his book, and these obstacles that he mentions here to compassion are hate, fear, attachment, and expectation. So Jack says, hate is the first and most obvious enemy of love. Hate hardens the heart. It holds tight to our pain and our anger so that the other is cast as inhuman. Hate disfigures our spirit. The next one that Jack mentions is fear, and he says the other great enemy of love is fear. Fear contracts the heart rather than opening it up. Its worries and anxieties stop the flow of love. Do we really want to live in fear, Jack asks us. There are also more subtle enemies of love, he says. These imitations of love are attachment and expectation. When attachment arises in the place of love, it sees the other as separate, it grasps and needs. Attachment is conditional, seeks control, and fears loss. If we speak to our heart, it will always tell us the truth. And the last one, expectation, is another imitation of love. We care for another, but we really want them to be some other way. Attachment to our hopes and desires, to our subtle expectations, destroys the tender space of love. Even the most benevolent expectations can feel like pressure and judgment to another. Love is generous without need. It is fulfilling in itself. It is courageous. Love offers kindness with no requirement for return. So that's from Jack Kornfield. Not all scars show, not all wounds heal. Often we don't see the pain someone feels. I think we can all relate to this quote as well. Times where we've been grieving the loss of someone or something in our life. And when we walk around in our everyday world doing what we do, people around us, people we meet, don't know what we've been through. They can't see the pain that's inside. So when we know this about ourselves, this can help us. It can be an aid in terms of seeing this in others. Others go through the same thing. So let's look at self-compassion, the other side of compassion, really. Compassion for others begins with kindness to ourselves. Love yourself, then forget it, then love the world. And the important aspect here is love yourself, because really we can't go any further without that initially. Compassion occurs when the heart quivers in response to the suffering of another, giving rise to the wish to alleviate the suffering. When we're suffering and feel the urge to help ourselves, we're experiencing self-compassion. This again is from Christopher Verma. Not one drop of my self-worth depends on your acceptance of me. With Quincy Jones. Some of you may know, a famous music producer. One of the greatest blocks to loving kindness is our own sense of unworthiness. If we leave ourselves out of the circle of love and compassion, we have misunderstood. So, as touched on earlier, self-compassion really is the foundation of compassion for others. Loving kindness, which is really another word for love and compassion, we can have also or express that loving kindness towards ourselves. And that love and compassion must begin with that kindness towards ourselves before we can extend that to others. And here's something I think a lot of us can relate to as well. When I fail, it's my fault. If I succeed, it's just fate. But we can get past this kind of an outlook. You can search the whole universe and not find a single being more worthy of love than yourself. Since each and every person is so precious to themselves, let the self-respecting harm no other being. If your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. So all of these slides here are just reinforcing this concept of self-compassion and the importance of self-compassion. Self-compassion is simply giving the same kindness to ourselves that we would give to others. And the self-compassion that we talk about here, it begins with learning to accept. Acceptance is a big part of this too. We're learning to accept whatever feelings are arising within us, whatever those feelings might be. On the other side of the coin, avoidance or resistance to these feelings only increases our suffering. Anxiety is a good example. For instance, after I've taught my clients in my private practice about mindfulness meditation, most of them confirmed to me later, ones that came to me with anxiety issues, they confirmed to me later that anxiety decreases the more they accept it, and it increases the more they resist it. And this has been pretty consistent in terms of the feedback that I get from my clients and in my own personal experience. So it's a paradox. At least it's a seeming paradox. However, it is critical to really understand that acceptance, this acceptance that we're talking about, is an integral part of it and really a necessary aspect of self-compassion. And I think it would behoove us all to learn how to fly. So here's Kristen Neff, and she is a remarkable psychologist who's done her whole body of work, basically, for the last at least a decade, maybe decade and a half, has been focused on compassion and self-compassion, doing both research and writing books, doing workshops, and so on and so forth. So I guess you could call her an expert in this area. And she says here that instead of mercilessly judging or criticizing yourself for various inadequacies or shortcomings, self-compassion means you are kind and understanding when confronted with personal failings. After all, whoever said you were supposed to be perfect? And this is really something for all of us to reflect on, I think, that sort of inner demand for perfection that we have of ourselves, especially when we fail or have challenging times, difficult times. And I think it's safe to say that deep within each and every one of us is a wish to be happy and to be free from suffering. And, of course, that starts with ourselves. We might add here too that self-compassion really, there could be critics of this that would say, well, self-compassion is really, it's a selfish pursuit. You know, we're being concerned about ourselves, we're self-centered. But really, when we look at this quote, for instance, you know, rather than being self-compassionate towards ourselves, would we rather be mercilessly judging and criticizing? Is it better to judge and criticize ourselves, or is it better to be compassionate toward ourselves? To understand that we're all human, that we all have personal failings. So before we move on to the next slide, I would like to read a quote from, actually from Christopher Germer again, on this particular area. Germer says, first we need to recognize that we deserve to feel better. When we feel really bad, most of us engage in self-punishment rather than self-compassion. We heap on self-criticism. This wouldn't have happened if I weren't so stupid. I know I can relate to that. How many of us have said those kinds of sentences in our self-talk? So Germer goes on here to say, we act as if suffering always points to a personal flaw rather than being a fact of the human condition. If we remind ourselves that wanting to feel better is a natural instinct, perhaps we'd be less likely to take ourselves to task when things go wrong. Wouldn't you still clean and bandage a wound when you get injured? Why not do the same for yourself when you're in emotional pain? That's from Christopher Germer. So let's look at three aspects or three essential aspects of self-compassion. And this again is based on the work of Kristin Neff that I quoted earlier. And we can see these three aspects, these three essential elements: mindfulness, self-kindness, and connectedness. How we usually react when bad things happen to us, though, just as we found in the last quote from Christopher Germer, is really the opposite of these elements of self-compassion that Kristin Neff has put forth. Rather than self-kindness, we're usually self-critical. Rather than being connected and being connected to our common humanity, we become self-isolated. Rather than being mindful and self-compassionate, we become self-absorbed. So if we look at these three, we say, for instance, self-kindness. Self-kindness is really the ground or the foundation here for self-compassion. A common humanity or connectedness sees that we all share this human condition. We all suffer. We all fail at times. And yet we all have the capacity to rise above these negative conditions to positivity and compassion. And the last one, of course, here is mindfulness. And mindfulness is about being aware of our internal world, our external world as well, of course, but more importantly here, being aware of our internal world in terms of self-compassion. And being aware of our internal world without judgment or condemnation. And that's a key area, a key aspect, without judgment or condemnation. So whereas resistance creates suffering, acceptance alleviates it. So there's this acceptance again that we've been talking about. And then resistance, which is the opposite of that. So in a way we could say acceptance, in its essence, is compassion. Compassion is acceptance. Acceptance means, in this context, to allow and even embrace whatever is arising in the moment. Sometimes it is something pleasant, something we like. Sometimes it is something unpleasant, something we don't like. But the sooner we find acceptance, that inner acceptance, compassionate acceptance, we can say, really, of what is arising in the moment, the sooner we find a sense of peace and balance in our life. Okay, so that's a pretty broad statement to make. We could see, easily understand how somebody might resist this. So let's have a look at what I call the mathematics of suffering. Pain multiplied by resistance equals suffering. So we experience pain, which all of us have, all of us do in this life at some time or another, to varying degrees. But the amount of resistance that comes up in us to that pain equals the amount of suffering that we will go through. Even just a brief reflection of our own lives, times when we've been through a difficult, challenging time, where there has been pain, grief, inner sadness, and so on, the amount that we resist that, the amount of the resistance to that, certainly equals the amount of the suffering that we experience. So we can also see when we look and reflect on our own lives that pain is inevitable. We all will experience this at different times in our lives, but suffering is optional. And how can we say this, that suffering is optional? Okay, the pain is there, we experience the pain. If we don't resist it, if we get to a place of acceptance, the suffering is diminished. And what this means then, and another way we could say this, again from Christopher Germer, is leaning into our problems with open eyes and an open heart, with awareness and compassion, is the process by which we get emotional relief. So this combination of mindfulness, meditation, and self-compassion is where the real power is. And for those of you who've heard me do other presentations here in this webinar series, you'll know that I talk quite a bit about mindfulness meditation. And mindfulness meditation goes hand in glove with self-compassion, really. And one definition of mindfulness is awareness. My apologies for the horn out there. One definition of mindfulness is awareness of present experience with acceptance. Now this, we're going to take a look at a study here that was done by David Distano, or look at least the results of it anyway. PhD psychologist at Northeastern University, and they actually did a series of studies. But what it was about was to see how mindfulness meditation, what impact mindfulness meditation had on compassion. And there was some interesting experiments that they did with the students that volunteered. So he says here, in terms of the results of these studies, that contemplative training, which was mindfulness meditation in this case, appears to teach the mind to move directly from an observation of suffering to benevolent action. In other words, being compassionate, without becoming paralyzed by the pain of others. So Dr. Distano and his team did a series of studies to look at the impact that mindfulness meditation might have on compassion. And as we can see here, the results were quite clear. Mindfulness meditation helps us to become more compassionate without the classic compassion burnout, as we call it. Well, Mr. Harris, I'm afraid you simply care too much. You have compassion fatigue. Yikes. I hope we don't look like that if we practice this. But. So a little bit more from David Distano here on the study that they did. So 8 weeks of meditation proved enough to triple the likelihood of this benevolent behavior, which was compassion, even under conditions known to discourage acts of kindness. So I think most of us would agree that an intervention like this that can shift human behavior by threefold is something definitely worth looking at. So next, let's have a look at compassion and the benefits of compassion. Why should we bother to be learning to be more compassionate in our lives? What are the benefits of that? So wisdom grows from roots of compassion. And this is a nice slide. It's a kind of a postcard. It's an aphorism, however you might say it. But we might easily read this and kind of look it over and go, oh yeah, that's nice, nice words and so on. But the interesting thing is that a study was done just in the last few years that actually supports this statement. And what they did was that, again, through the practice of mindful self-compassion, they realized that this practice did lead to an increase in wisdom. And the way they looked at wisdom was that they defined it as the ability to make sound judgments in challenging situations. So the famous frustration and appreciation slides, and I have used this in another presentation, but these graphics here are so powerful that they're worth looking at again, especially in light of a topic such as compassion, self-compassion. So what these slides point to, these slides are from the HeartMath Institute, and they've done over 2.5 decades of research on the power of emotions and how emotions impact our emotional world, of course, our mental world, and in fact our whole physiology. And as a result, here we can see on the left, even if we don't know what these slides are, we look at frustration, and of course other negative emotions also fit into this category, such as anger or anxiety, depression. They'll all look a little different than this slide, but this gives you a good sense of the kind of chaotic and imbalanced and incoherent kind of sine wave that we get as a result of when we're experiencing negative emotions. And on the other side, of course, we have this nice smooth sine wave, which is a reflection of positive emotions such as appreciation, joy, happiness, love, and things like compassion, of course. So these slides point to the power of positive emotions to generate balance and coherence, and really a sense of well-being in our whole system. This is a quote from Dr. Rick Hanson, also a neuropsychologist who's done decades of research into the effect of positive and negative emotions on the human brain and how that all works from the physiological point of view. Quite a fascinating book, Hardwiring Happiness. I would recommend that as well to anybody that wishes to do further reading into this. So Dr. Hansen says research on positive emotions shows that these reduce reactivity and stress, help heal psychological wounds, and improve resilience, well-being, and life satisfaction. He also says that positive emotions also strengthen your immune system, protect your heart, and foster a healthier and longer life. And again, these quotes are based on over 2 decades of research. They're not just wishful thinking or a nice little aphorism. And of course, on the other side of the coin, and this quote from Barbara Fredrickson, who we touched on earlier, negative thoughts and negative emotions feed on each other, and as they do, they pull you down their abyss. This is what Fredrickson talks about, a kind of a downward spiral. Negative thoughts and negative emotions keep feeding on each other and pulling us down. And of course, positive emotions do the reverse. They pull us up and they feed on each other as we practice them, put them into practice in our life. So besides feeling good in the moment, when you take in positive experiences, you are not only growing flowers in your mind, as Dr. Hansen says, you are growing new neural circuits in your brain. You are hardwiring happiness. So that's an interesting statement, hardwiring happiness, growing new neural circuits. So of course the understanding for up until the last probably decade or so, maybe decade and a half, was that once the brain was wired a certain way, that was it. It didn't change. It was static. But now the new research in neuroscience is showing and proving that we can, in fact, change those neural circuits. So that gives us hope for the impact of negative emotions have on our brain. We can actually, through certain practices, focusing on positive emotions, begin to grow new neural circuits in our brain and basically change the way we are and the way we live. So let go of those who bring you down and surround yourself with those who bring out the best in you. I do a fair bit of work with people with alcohol and drug dependency, and one of the key things that that I have found for people with this issue is that they need to take a serious look at, and in most cases change their friendship circles, change the people that they are spending time with. Because, of course, they find that most of their friends, not all of them probably, but many of them are friends that basically either encourage them or encourage the use or the misuse of alcohol and drugs. So this is the reason I mention this, of course, is that it's an important thing for all of us to think about and all of us to look at. So if we find that in our lives we're in the company of people who are mostly negative or negative most of the time, dwelling on negative emotions and negative experience and so on, it may behoove us to have a look at that and to evaluate our relationship with those people. Now this is from Dr. Hansen's work, and it's kind of a fancy term, experience-dependent neuroplasticity. And what he means here is the word neuroplasticity, of course, means the ability of the brain to basically reprogram itself. And experience-dependent, of course, means based on our experiences, based on our emotions, based on, yes, these experiences in our life. And so what he says, experience-dependent neuroplasticity, what that means is that negative emotions and experiences are like Velcro to the brain. Positive emotions and experiences are like Teflon. Wow, so when we read that, we think, what hope is there? And what they call this, there's a word for it, it's called negativity bias. So our brain, because of evolution and so on and so forth, which Hansen gets into talking about in his book, and we won't go into detail here, but based on evolutionary impulses and experiences and so on, our brains were basically wired to be have this negativity bias so that we could survive in very challenging and difficult situations, which we did when in earlier times, avoiding saber-toothed tigers and so on and so forth. So there's a reason for this negativity bias that we find. So I'm just going to take a moment then to read a quote from Hansen's book on hardwiring happiness. So this bias, this negativity bias that we just talked about, it creates two kinds of problems. First, it increases the negative. It pulls our attention to what is or could be bad, makes you overreact to it, and stores the negative experience in implicit memory. It also creates vicious circles of negativity both inside your brain and with other people. In a variety of ways, this bias increases your stresses, worries, frustrations, irritations, sorrows, and so on, and conflicts with others. Second, the negativity bias decreases the positive. It slides your attention past the good facts around you. It makes you underreact to the good facts that you do notice. And it slips the good experiences you do have right through the brain. That's the Teflon aspect, leaving little or no trace behind. This bias is a kind of bottleneck bottleneck that makes it harder to get happiness into your brain. So that's the bad news, we could call it. The good news is that we can consciously change that natural dynamic by consciously enriching and absorbing positive experiences such as self-compassion and compassion. And thus, we are hardwiring happiness, as Dr. Hansen says. And compassion and self-compassion, as it turns out, are two of the most powerful means to this end. So let's go back for a moment to Jack Kornfield's book, and this is a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the famous Russian writer. He says, "If only it were all so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere else insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were simply necessary to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart?" So the ground of love, we could say, is found beyond judgment and blame. And Dr. Hansen in his book uses the metaphor of a garden with flowers and weeds. He says to think of the mind like a garden with flowers and weeds. And we can pull the weeds, of course, by decreasing what's negative in our minds. Or we can grow flowers by increasing positive things in our minds. And as he says, growing flowers happens to be the most powerful because it actually rewires the brain, and in turn has a positive impact on our body and our mind. And, as you might suspect, coming from me, mindfulness practice is one of the best tools we have available to us to help us in this regard. So we're going to look again briefly to Dr. Hansen, a quote in his book. I'll just turn to that now. Taking in the good builds up your inner strengths. Your body will become increasingly resilient, and your mind will become increasingly centered in a fundamental peace, contentment, and love. So you'll recover more quickly from negative experiences in general. That's why we prefer to grow flowers than to pull weeds. Taking in the good brings you home. Home to a comfortable intimacy with your own experience, to a confident openness to life, to a sense of competence, even mastery with your own mind. And this is why, of course, in the beginning I called it the royal road to health and happiness, that road that takes us home. Yes, I think I have one more quote here from Dr. Hansen, and I'll just read that now. Peace, contentment, and love are important aims for most people. These are the rewards, the fruits of a good life. Additionally, because of experience-dependent neuroplasticity, there's that fancy word again, these experiences are a powerful method, a wonderful path for transforming your brain. Every time you take in the sense of feeling safe, satisfied, or connected, you stimulate responsive circuits in your brain. When you stimulate a neural circuit, you strengthen it. I'm going to read that again because that's important. When you stimulate a neural circuit, you strengthen it. To borrow a Tibetan saying, taking in the good is taking the fruit as the path. Happiness is skillful means. So happiness itself becomes the skillful means that helps us to rewire the brain. And now from Barbara Hansen again. Barbara Fredrickson, getting my psychologists mixed up there. So mindfulness training leaves a lasting mark on the brain. It alters the basic metabolism and brain circuits known to underlie emotional responding, reducing activity in circuits linked with negativity and increasing activity in circuits linked with positivity. So again, more support, confirmation of the power of mindfulness, especially in relation to compassion and self-compassion. So we could say especially a mindfulness kind of meditation practice that integrates the heart-centered practice of self-compassion or loving kindness, which we said earlier is another name for that. And we could say that this type of practice is even more powerful and effective than simply mindfulness meditation on its own. It's really a key tool in applying positivity in our lives. And basically the science is in, as we've seen during this presentation, positivity that is dwelling on dwelling on and nurturing the positive, leads to all kinds of beneficial outcomes, mentally, emotionally, physically, and even spiritually. So at this stage, we have about 14 or 15 minutes left. I just wanted to do a simple exercise with you. It's an exercise in self-compassion. So for those of you that have a piece of paper and a pencil handy, this exercise will only take about 5 minutes, just in case you're wondering. And it's brief, but it's quite a helpful little exercise. So you can just grab a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, and we can do this for a few minutes here. And this exercise is it's called How Would You Treat a Friend? And this is from the work of Kristen Neff, who we quoted earlier. So I'm hoping you have your pencil and your paper now. So the first step, if you could first think about times when a close friend feels really bad about him or herself, or is really struggling in some way. How would you respond to your friend in this situation, especially when you're at your best? Please write down what you typically do, what you say, and note the tone in which you typically talk to your friends. So if you could take a moment to do that. Again, what you're writing down is what you typically do when your friend is struggling in some way, when you're at your best. What do you typically do? What do you typically say? And what kind of a tone do you say it in? I'll give you a minute for that. Okay, so the second step here, if we could now think about times when you feel bad about yourself or you are struggling with something. How do you typically respond to yourself in these situations? Please write down what you typically do, what you say in your self-talk, and note the tone in which you talk to yourself. So take half a minute to do that, please. So the third step here is we have to kind of rush through this a little bit because of our time constraints, but you get the gist of it. So the third step is, did you notice a difference between how you react with your friend and how you react with yourself? If so, ask yourself why. What factors or fears come into play that lead you to treat yourself and others so differently? So we're looking at the difference there, how we treat our friends, how we treat ourselves in the third step. And then the fourth step, please write down how you think things might change if you responded to yourself in the same way we typically respond to a close friend when you're suffering, when you're going through some pain and suffering, struggling with something or a challenging time. So the essence of this exercise is really to get to a place where we can say, why not try treating ourselves like a good friend, the way we treat a good friend, and see what happens. That's basically a simple exercise, but very powerful. And Kristen Neff, which we'll see on as we end up here today, on her website, there are many exercises and things that we can do here to develop our own self-compassion and compassion in general. So in closing here, wrapping up today, I just wanted to read one story here that was in the Province newspaper back in December, and I quite like the story, and it's a kind of a nice example of compassion here, and how it shows up in a practical sense, right? In the everyday world. So the story here in the Province, I'll skip pieces that aren't so important here, but the general gist of it is a Vancouver woman, this is the story now, a Vancouver woman who has been living in second stage transitional housing for 17 months with her daughter may soon have a space to call home. And some people are going to build a solar-powered tiny home for Francesca Murray and her 4-year-old daughter. This must be what winning the lottery feels like, said Murray, a former ICBC analyst who left a difficult home situation in 2013. It was like Santa came when I was asleep, and I woke up the next morning and there's a house. The house isn't built, not yet, and it's still unclear where the approximately 260 to 300 square foot home, which will be built in Abbotsford, will be parked. But the promise of a home to call her own already has left Murray amazed and immensely grateful at the kindness of strangers. The campaign was launched in late November by a fellow named Bryce Royer and another friend of his called Russo Lanera. Now, Royer, who is 31, has been battling stomach cancer and depression for the last few years. Earlier this year, heeding his doctor's advice that love and caring are the best medicine, he posted a Craigslist ad selling free unconditional love that went viral. Murray remembered watching him on TV. He was this guy with cancer who talks about unconditional love, she recalled. Who is he? She searched him out on Facebook, and the two became friends. When Murray learned that Royer needed help cooking, she didn't hesitate. I'm a wonderful cook, she said. This was something I can do to help. Her selfless offer unleashed what Royer called a chain of kindness. When Royer found out Murray was living at a shelter, he and Lunera surprised her with a weekly food delivery of organic produce she shared with the other women at the shelter. Then, when they learned her 18-month term at the shelter would end in February, they embarked on an ambitious plan, a plan to build Murray a home. Within a month, they had raised $20,000 for the home and another $5,000 for Murray and her daughter's short-term housing needs. Within a month. That's quite remarkable, really. So one of the donors was a Chicago man named Lou Jenkins. He donated $1, the last dollar he had in his account. He told an American news station that he had been homeless himself and couldn't imagine what it would be like for a child. Jenkins' donation then inspired an anonymous donor to chip in the last $4,455 the campaign needed. Generosity is contagious, the donor wrote on the fundraising page. So a woman named Kyla Feenstra will build the house, which will be ready in March or April. So apparently it's already ready. I haven't followed up on that aspect of it. But. So he has been in talks with the City of Vancouver to find land for the home, which he hopes could be run by a local nonprofit and be the first in a tiny home community that could house homeless people or people at risk of homelessness. Rent would be by donation or paid using rental assistance checks, which could then be used to build more tiny homes. Ideally, we want it to be in Vancouver, said Royer. There's been some discussion about location, different ideas, and where we can put this tiny home and so on. The main concern is the cost of hookups, and that's not an insurmountable issue, he says. In case Murray, who is on a BC housing wait list, finds other suitable housing in the meantime, the mobile home can be used by others in need. Both Royer and Murray said they never anticipated that their small acts of kindness would have such a wide ripple effect. Murray credited Royer, saying, "This is what Bryce does. He activated the power of the heart." Royer said it was all Murray's doing. "She offered to help me, and she's helping the entire world now," he said. "It's like this chain of kindness that continues to create this butterfly effect. It's beautiful to see. It makes me feel good about this world." Anyway, I think that's a good note to end on. Wonderful story. And there's lots of them out there like that. Just wanted to take one moment here to look at this slide of sources and references, and as you can see here, the names of the books and the authors that I've been quoting from today. But also I wanted to bring your attention to the bottom 2 points here. Kristen Neff's site called selfcompassion.org. There's all kinds of helpful aids and exercises and so on there that you can pursue and practice yourself. And similarly on Barbara Fredrickson's site, positivityratio.com. Lots of tools there to help with shifting our focus to positive emotions, and then of course all the benefits that come from focusing on the positive, as we've touched on today in the presentation. So for those of you that feel inspired, please do check those out. They are very good websites and excellent books. So thank you for your time and your attention today. Again, my name is Brian Haley. I'm a registered clinical counselor on the Sunshine Coast of BC. Thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, of course, please feel free to contact Humanicare. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day.